It was an overcast evening in a small, quiet village nestled in the hills, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's name, and strange happenings were a rarity. But that autumn, something changed, something that would forever mark the village with a dark, terrifying legacy. It all began with the annual Halloween festival. Every year, the townspeople would gather in the town square to celebrate the holiday by carving pumpkins, lighting bonfires, and telling ghost stories. But this year, there was something different about the pumpkins. A strange rumor had begun to circulate just days before the festival. A massive, unnaturally large pumpkin had been found in the forest at the edge of town. It had been discovered by a young couple, Emily and Mark, who were walking through the woods when they stumbled upon it. They described the pumpkin as being unlike any other, perfectly round, with a deep orange glow that seemed to flicker as if alive. The couple thought it odd but didn't think much of it and decided to bring it back to town to carve it for the festival. But when they brought the pumpkin to the village square, it caused an immediate stir. Everyone gathered around to examine it, and it was clear that this was no ordinary pumpkin. Its skin was unnaturally smooth, almost perfect, and the carving mark made on it, a simple smiley face, seemed to shift slightly, as though the pumpkin's features were changing with each passing moment. The villagers brushed it off as a strange coincidence and went about their evening, carving their pumpkins and enjoying the festivities. But there was an unsettling feeling in the air that no one could shake. That night, the village was alive with laughter and music, but as the clock struck midnight, something strange happened. A cold wind blew across the square, extinguishing most of the lanterns and sending the pumpkin with a peculiar grin rolling across the ground. The ground beneath it seemed to shift, and those closest to the pumpkin heard a low, guttural whisper in the wind. Some claimed it sounded like a voice, others described it as a growl. But all agreed on one thing: the air had turned inexplicably cold, and there was an overwhelming sense of dread hanging over the square. Then, one by one, people began to feel sick. At first, it was just a slight dizziness, a feeling of nausea. But soon, a deep, unsettling fear crept over them. A few of the villagers became disoriented, stumbling away from the square. And some reported seeing strange figures lurking in the shadows, their forms indistinct and almost translucent. No one could explain it, but they all felt it. The air was thick with something dark, something malignant. Mark and Emily, who had brought the pumpkin to town, were the first to notice it. As they stood near the pumpkin, they could see the faces of the others. Some laughing nervously, others whispering in fear, but Mark could feel something pulling him closer to it. The pumpkin seemed to glow even brighter now, its smile wide and mocking. As Emily reached out to touch it, the ground beneath them seemed to shift again, and a deep voice, as cold as the winter wind, whispered their names. They jerked back in terror, but it was too late. The pumpkin's smile twisted into a menacing grimace, and from its hollow eyes, a dark mist began to pour out, enveloping the square. People screamed, running in every direction, but the mist seemed to follow them, growing thicker and colder, until it was impossible to see. The villagers tried to flee, but the fog was disorienting, and many of them tripped, falling into the darkness. The mist surrounded them, and their screams were drowned out by the whispering, the faint but insistent sound of something, or someone, watching them. Hours passed before the fog cleared, and when it finally did, the village was eerily silent. The square was empty, save for the pumpkin, which had returned to its place, glowing faintly. But something was wrong. People began to realize that a few were missing. Emily and Mark had vanished, along with several others who had been near the pumpkin when the mist had engulfed the square. The village was never the same after that night. As the days passed, rumors swirled about the pumpkin, about its strange power, and the whispers that seemed to follow it. Those who had been closest to the pumpkin spoke of voices that haunted them in the night, of dreams filled with shadows, and of a cold presence that never seemed to leave. The authorities were called in to investigate, but no trace of the missing people was found. No explanation could be offered. The pumpkin, however, remained. And as it sat in the square, it seemed to mock the villagers, its grin never wavering, its eyes always watching. People began to avoid the town square, and the once celebrated Halloween festival was cancelled forever. The pumpkin, however, remained. Year after year, it would return, seemingly untouched by time, its grin as twisted and unsettling as ever. No one dared to approach it, and those who tried to destroy it, burn it, smash it, or throw it into the river found that the pumpkin would always return, as if mocking their attempts. It was as if it had a life of its own, a malevolent spirit bound to it, forever tied to the village. The whispers continued to spread. Some claimed that the pumpkin was cursed, a vessel for an ancient evil that had been awakened by the villagers' careless curiosity. Others believed it was a trap set by something far darker, a creature that fed on fear, a spirit that thrived on the terror it created. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: the pumpkin was not just a decoration, nor just a strange artifact. It was a curse, a living nightmare that the village would never be free of. And so, the village became a place of quiet terror, its once vibrant streets now haunted by the whispers of those who had disappeared. The pumpkin's wicked smile remained, a symbol of the horrors that lurked in the shadows, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to fall under its spell. It was no longer just a Halloween decoration, it was a force, an ancient, malevolent presence that had claimed the village and would never let go. As the years passed, no one dared to speak of the pumpkin. It became a legend, a horrifying tale passed down through the generations. But every Halloween, when the wind howled through the trees and the moon hung low in the sky, the villagers could feel it, its eyes watching them, its grin waiting to return. And though they tried to forget, the pumpkin would never let them escape its curse. It was always there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again.
Like and subscribe my channel for more interesting videos.